All right, great day, Gadfly subscribers. It's Carlos. I hope everyone's having a great day today. Also, want to welcome the people that are tuning in for the first time to the Gadfly multi-channel network. Today is Tuesday, December the 15th, and you can find out about our Gadfly multi-channel network by visiting our primary site, which is the gadfly.vhx.tv. Also, please follow us on Twitter, which is over at the Gadfly MCN, and we do also have a YouTube channel for the Gadfly that we occasionally will post public content there. And very excited today to be joined by London Paul of the Sirius Report. Always enjoy my conversations with Paul. They're always a lot of fun, very engaging, and his insights and his contribution to the Gadfly are just extremely important. So, Paul, good morning. How are you, sir?
Yeah, good morning, CJ. Yeah, we're very well. And yourself?
Doing great, Paul. All things considered, we are living probably we are living probably the most interesting times of our lives, and I'm excited for that, Paul. I truly am.
Well, look, it's taking this analogy to the extreme. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. The only problem is we're going to have to make an enormous amount of omelettes and break an enormous amount of eggs, and that creates chaos. It creates uncertainty, and humanity is generally not very good at handling uncertainty. It likes structure and order to its life. And well, Lisa and I were only saying last night, imagine if you'd gone back 12 months ago and said all this would happen in 2020, your people would go, this is not possible. And okay, the whole sort of virus thing is a separate issue, but there's all the other things going on and the enormous changes that are happening geopolitically, economically, financially, and you wrap this whole virus debacle around it, and it's not like it's going to go away. I mean, even if at some point they decide the virus has gone away, and we're not going to discuss the virus today, but there's all the other problems that are just stacking up and growing and becoming more and more acute. And obviously, the US election is one of those prime examples, because whatever the outcome is, and increasingly, I mean, you and I discussed it last week, and Ken and I have discussed it, and we said the chances of Trump turning this around were decreasing. Well, I think after the electoral college vote, they've decreased even more. And from what I'm hearing and understanding, there's a lot of people now saying to Trump just to give up. Trump, of course, won't give up, and I'm not suggesting he should, but I think he'll just keep going till I don't know, is it maybe even past the 6th of January? But I mean, there's a lot of things to discuss, and I think it's worth spending a bit of time. And for me, it's treading the line in the middle where we're going, okay, there's two sides to this argument. It doesn't mean, I'm not saying there isn't some obvious reason to support one side of the argument, but whenever we discuss this, we have to look at both sides of the argument. And as I've said from day one, from the 3rd of November, if Trump wants to, he's going to have to raise the game to the point that he can win the case that there's electoral fraud. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons why that hasn't been the case. And as we've discussed previously, I think they made some big errors of judgment in how they handle this and should have done a lot more before the election. But anyway, we are where we are. And of course, as you and I and everyone else knows, the electoral college vote, surprise, returned 306 to 232. And the question is, what happens going forward?
Yeah, it's great points, Paul, and I think we're now at that pivotal moment where is it a Hail Mary pass, is a 11th hour type scenario? And what I truly get amazed by, and you said something important at the beginning in regards to just humanity in general, and I'd like to think as we enter this pivotal time, I would hope that there could have been some effort to really try to bring us closer together as people for the benefit of all things good. But it's challenging to do that, Paul. I think that during this time period, things are even more divided, and whether it's by accident or by design, and everything ranging from the COVID, the virus, the lockdowns, to the election things. It seems like the energy and affecting all things seems like it's even more it's escalated, Paul, the last 30 days.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is kind of an inevitability because the problem is traditionally in humanity, in times of adversity, and however, and adversity means many things to many different people. But if we look at track the progress of what's happened in 2020, there was the whole virus, there's the whole issue of lockdowns, there's a whole mismanagement of the process. I mean, as I've said, I gave them some latitude early on, and I think that was reasonable, where you initially went, okay, we don't know what we're dealing with. And then, but I think since May time, they've completely mismanaged it. Now, people believe for a bunch of reasons why that's the case. And I still stand by what I've said, that this is not some intentional design to destroy everything, because, as I've said many times, they spent the last 12 years fighting tooth and nail to prevent that. So they're not suddenly going to go, okay, withhold a buy and we're just going to blow everything up, because you don't spend 12 years trying to prevent that and then suddenly decide you're going to do it. But anyway, setting that aside, the problem is what has happened in the US, and unfortunately, Trump's one of those figures. He's kind of like what I call Marmite. People either love him or hate him, quite literally. So immediately when you have a president like that, it's going to divide Americans of American opinion right down the middle. And that's literally, of course, what's happened. Now, I'm not saying right down the middle in terms of numbers, but people are going to sit on either side and they're going to be very pro him. And there's a lot of people who are very pro him and don't look at any of the mistakes he's made, because everything Trump does is right. And then you've got people on the other side of the equation who think everything that Trump's done is wrong. And unfortunately, when you have these polarized positions, when you have this election, this polarization is getting even worse. And this, unfortunately, the kind of the consequence of this drawn out process is it's dividing people even more. People are becoming more and more on both sides of the equation. You've got the Republican side, or the Trump supporters, who are desperate to believe that there's some way out of it, and somehow they're going to pull, a rabbit out the hat, as you say, at the in the ninth innings or the 11th hour, and then you've got the other side who are just ridiculing everything that's going on, and that's just polarizing people more and more. And as we've said since the onset of the Trump administration, we always knew what was going to happen to the US economy. We always knew what would happen to the financial system, which was ongoing, and the dollar. And the unfortunate thing is, the one point in American history where you need everyone pulling in the same direction, people are pulling in opposite directions. And okay, on the Trump side, they'll believe there's still a chance that that he can turn this around. But I think that's increasingly becoming more and more unlikely as every week goes by. And I know people are pinning hopes on all manner of things, but there's nothing to suggest at this point. They haven't, they haven't produced the smoking gun. Now, I know that people think there's a smoking gun, but if they're really going to make this stick with all the problems that's perceived in the legal system and the political system and everything else, if they've really got a smoking gun, they should have played it 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. And therefore, that concerns me. Doesn't mean there isn't evidence to support electoral fraud, but there's one thing having evidence and one thing being able to present it and make it stick. And that's unfortunately the way the Western world is. We know the entire Western political system and the media and everything else is completely and utterly corrupt and flawed, and these are not something that anyone should be surprised about. But on this basis, the problem that we have now is because people are so pulled apart, and of course, people become more and more pulled apart and polarized because the economic system, because there's people now who are going to go, well, Trump kept telling us the economy was great, and now suddenly the economy is collapsing, so it's all Trump's fault. Of course, that train long left the station a decade before Trump even came into office. So, but because of this, people get polarized. So it's not like we've just had a virus and the policy was wrong, but the economy was strong. We've had that. The economy was already weak. It's weakening the political system as well by this election. The US economy is cratering. The US standing on the world stage is cratering. The US dollar as the world reserve currency is cratering. So multiple things all happening simultaneously that's dragging people apart. And and whatever the outcome is, come May January the 21st, the argument is America's then just got to pull together and forget the political divide. Although I think that's impossible for a lot of people, and I understand why. But ultimately, it's self-defeating because the political system is not geared to support the American people. It's there to again rip them apart, polarize them, and divide and conquer them.
Yeah, and that's even just so clearly obvious. When we have a Congress and a Senate that has yet to really push forward any type of relief programs for the American people, and that's at blame of both the Democratic and the Republican parties. Neither one of them have moved any type of bill forward to come to terms, come to agreement. What they keep in mind is unfortunately is just their own special interest in terms of who they feel that should get the bailout money, where that money should go. The other challenging part to their conversation, Paul, is that many times we've been very critical of this administration for the last 3 years. We've recognized good things. We've been when called out bad things, when some things questionable things that have happened, we've been quick to call that out. I think in this situation, it's difficult in the conversation because the moment that you start talking about any type of irregularities in the elections, any type of potential fraud, people instantly associate, and primarily on the Democratic side, instantly look at it as a support for Trump. That you're a Trump supporter. I think when in fact, I think if you did just a check or a questionnaire or some type of analysis to assess the difference between those components is, in reality, I think it's just ensuring the fact that with our election process, the integrity of our election system, that those things remain in place, not just for this election cycle, but as we move forward. And I like what David Knight had to say today. David Knight, I was listening to him, and it's kind of funny because I don't know if a lot of people know David Knight, but he's kind of the other contributor over at another program with another character that's over there called Alex Jones. And please don't think anything differently of me that I occasionally listen to him, Paul. but long story short, it's like listening to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because Alex is obviously so pro Trump, and then David Knight's over there like critical of all things. He's critical of like the Operation Warp Speed and everything, and I think he kind of nailed it today. Is that I think part of the loss of the conversation is that people are making this more about a pro-Trump thing versus just a thing in regards to our republic, our America, the republic, and our Constitution, and ensuring that our elections are accurate, that voting does matter. And so, and I don't think that you can ever dial that back. I don't think that's anything that can really be avoided. But speaking to it more of a personal matter, like my personal perspective, and I post quite a bit in social media, and instantly someone posted like, well, you were supportive of Trump for those years. And I don't defend, I rarely engage in post on social media and the back and forth and everything. I just don't have time for it. But that's how it comes out, that if you instantly try to point out some of these things that are happening, it's instantly that it becomes a pro-Trump thing versus hey, you know what? I'm not pro-Trump. I'm pro-America. I'm pro-Republic. I'm pro-constitutional liberty, individual freedom. And to me, that's what it's about more than anything in regards to the elections. And I think that there are some things that if there is, I don't want to say smoking gun, but if there is proof that there are certain things that have happened, then the time is running short for those to come to the surface and be revealed, Paul.
Oh yeah, and no, absolutely, and you do make an extremely valid point. There's no doubt that, I mean, the Bush-Gore thing was questionable. There was suggestions that that the election was rigged to make Obama win instead of Mitt Romney, and who knows if we go back through history. I mean, so yeah, there's something far more important in terms of the notion of electoral fraud. Everyone in Western nations goes, no, that happens in Venezuela or somewhere else. It just doesn't happen in our countries. And I think, yes, there is a far more fundamental point that says, yes, there is certainly questionable elements in and not just the US electoral system, I would say in Western nations in general. And there's something far, far bigger at play that needs to be investigated. But the problem is, it's the irony that in many ways, that Trump as a president has caused this kind of division, has caused this kind of polarization to such an extent that I have to be careful how I say this, but on some level, it's actually undermining the ability to have, as you rightly say, these kind of discussions that says, well, there needs to be a broader investigation. They need, whatever the outcome is come January, someone needs to sit down, go away and investigate elections, investigate the process, investigate how people vote, voting machines, and everything else, and say, okay, there are these deficiencies, and they need to be addressed. So future elections, we don't have this problem. I mean, for me as an outsider, I also find it quite bizarre that, okay, you elect the president, and then 4 or 5 weeks later, this electoral college vote happens, which could actually decide to do the opposite and undermine, the vote of the people. I mean, I was kind of jokingly saying to Lisa, they could have all voted for Kanye West to be president. It's this kind of situation where there's all these stages, and I think it undermines the process of the election. That's only my personal viewpoint, and I'm not suggesting scrap the electoral college vote and scrap all these processes, but it works two ways. Okay, you can argue it safeguards an election, but it also could come to a situation in the future where the electoral college vote could undermine the vote of the people. They could decide suddenly to turn things around. I mean, forget the issue of Biden and Trump, but imagine in 4 years, 8 years' time, where someone's legitimately elected. And what happens if there's suddenly a desire to turn the vote around and go, well, actually, we've decided to through the electoral college system, voting system, we're going to vote for the other presidential candidate. And I mean, so for me, the US electoral system, I find bizarre. It seems to be over elaborate, and excuse me, as you said, doesn't have some processes in place for the actual election. And of course, yes, there is no doubt that the coronavirus contributed to, a complete lack of understanding. On some level, the argument is that votes were included shouldn't be because they extended deadlines for voting and all the, so that just completely muddied the waters. But I think there needs to be a consistent approach from state to state that says, okay, here are the regulations. The regulations are set in stone. This is the process. This is how it is. The only way these processes can be changed if there's broad agreement across all states to change those. And just literally have a one vote per state that says, okay, we want to change this in the future. And that might be mail-in ballots. It could be anything. But I think it's extremely important that that is actually undertaken, and there needs to be a review. But the chances are, come January, this just won't happen. It all get forgotten. Okay, Trump supporters will be angry for years to come, and I don't dispute that. But nothing will be done to address the fundamental problems that underpin this.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. That's there lies the rub. Is that in the event that there was a manipulation, in the event that something did happen, how do you correct that without disenfranchising either side, either people that voted for who and of a party, and the correction that's needed to take place? That's the question, and it's kind of odd. So yesterday, it appears, Paul, that the Republicans in several states did put up competing electorals to attend to confirm. What are your thoughts on that, Paul? Is that just a last ditch effort, or what takes place with the competing electorals for each state?
Well, I think personally, it's an act of desperation. I mean, we need to, in all these situations, I hate having to qualify this, but unfortunately, past experience has shown me we need to qualify this. This is not, forget the issue of electoral fraud for a minute. The issue is they're at this position. Now, again, this is one of those situations. This could set an ugly precedent. And there might be an argument that, well, from a Trump supporter's perspective, there's an argument at the moment that says, we have a right to do this because we should overturn, the electoral college vote, so Trump wins instead of Biden. Well, okay, let's just assume that came to pass. I think it's unlikely, but let's just assume it does. That could set a precedent in the future where someone goes, well, actually, we don't like the outcome of this election, and maybe in the future, let's just say, Trump was standing in 2024, he may legitimately win, and someone goes, well, there was a precedent set in 2020. I know, obviously, if Trump wins, that wouldn't happen. You get the point. And then someone does the same process, hijacks the electoral college vote, and someone goes, well, you did it in 2020. You could end up with this situation where, yes, you're trying to prevent voter fraud, irregularities, and make sure the system is fair and equitable. But you could be setting precedents in the future where no future US election is worth the paper it's written on or anything else. It could be a complete chaos every 4 years. So again, that's me sitting in the middle going, I'm not looking at this politically. I think it is DAC. I think it's just we're running out of options. The Supreme Court threw out the case from Texas and by implication all the other states. So what options have we got left? Yeah, we're still scratching around trying to file some lawsuits, but we're running out of options. Let's try this. And I've said for weeks it's a scattergun approach. They're just throwing mud at the wall and hoping something sticks at some point. And the problem with that is that also creates a very bad impression because, okay, people are concerned about the integrity of the judicial system and about lawmakers and about state attorneys and all these other things. And okay, that's understandable. But if you keep throwing mud at a wall trying to get something to stick, people within the legal system start to go, this is just, we're seeing it again and again. It's just repetition of the same process. They need to be far more targeted, far more efficient in what they did. And there was the whole case with Michigan, which came out where, this report came out. It was suggesting that, they did this forensic audit of these Dominion voting systems. And I'm not going to go through every single detail, but, we knew on election night that Biden received thousands more votes. And then 2 days later, the vote actually went to Trump. And then I think it was around the 20th of November, they removed another 1,300 or so votes from Biden. And they're saying, well, this is human error. Well, they tried, it's not consistent with human error. Therefore, it's systemic machine software error. And of course, Michigan election officials have denounced this. Surprise, surprise. But for me, what's more important than all this is, okay, you've got two sides again. There's the side that's saying, well, we've released this 23-page report. We think there's enough grounds to suggest that there was problems with the vote, that we feel that the vote lacks integrity. But the problem is the same group previously stated that there were 6 precincts with more than 120% turnout in the election, but the data was apparently incorrect. So that immediately causes a problem because it shouldn't do, but if someone makes a statement in one hand and it's proved to be incorrect, it casts a shadow of doubt as to what's been said with regards to some other aspect to do with the software. Now, the other problem is that the question comes about is, okay, if they had concerns about all this, and this report was obviously initially it was all redacted, then it was released, and both sides of the equation, Dominion's chipped in saying there's no software glitch. I think it was in Antrim County. And there was all these statements to and froing suggesting all manner of things. But the problem is, at no point did they say, well, actually, we want we want you to review this and hand count every single vote. Now, if that's the route to go down, don't go down this route of or because what's happening is they're saying all these things are the case, and I'm not disputing that what this report's saying, because frankly I can't dispute it. But the thing they could have done, and if the Trump campaign or the Trump team had evidence of wrongdoing, they should have requested a hand recount of every ballot in the state. They didn't do this. Now, for me, that's a fundamental error of judgment. That would be the first thing you would do, because then that would have given you gravity to support your view about the voting machines and anything else that's contained in this report, which I can't comment because I've not read it. But that's a fundamental problem. And this is, for me, we keep seeing these fundamental errors of judgment. Now, if I'm looking at this objectively, from my standpoint, if you don't request the obvious thing, why? Why would you, if you've got the smoking gun of evidence, as I refer to it, or real suspicion of things, you would go for the jugular and say, I want a hand recount of every ballot in the state. Now, there's two sides to this argument that says, well, one, it was a massive oversight, which it could be, or two, they didn't request it because in reality, they didn't actually have the evidence of wrongdoing they're claiming they have. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying from a legal standpoint, there's going to be a situation now where people are looking at this going, well, why didn't they do this? And this is not helping the Trump team, Trump campaign, whatever you want to call it, in trying to ascertain, that there was some kind of issue to do with it being machine errors. And the other thing with Antrim County is it was already turned around. And what was actually where Biden was supposed to be 7,500 plus votes ahead, subsequently Trump won Antrim County. So why are you actually using that as an example of this, what you might term endemic voter fraud or voter irregularities, whatever you want to call it, when it was actually already turned around and Trump went from losing it to winning it? Because it's kind of like you're picking on the wrong county. So again, for me, it's the strategy they're deploying. Now, if it's an incorrect strategy, that's one thing. But there's a side from on a legal standpoint that says, well, if you've got the smoking gun evidence, but you're not actually going to reinforce that with a hand count of all the ballots, then it undermines the credibility of what you're saying, even if it's just implied. And for me, I've looked at every single lawsuit that's filed, because there's 50 odd, but of which a lot of them have been, well, nearly all of them have been thrown out. Now, people will say, okay, if you're on the Trump side, well, this is predictable because the entire legal system's flawed. But then there's a lot of these things that have been thrown out by appointees of Trump who've thrown everything out. I mean, the Supreme Court was loaded with 3 Trump appointees and they still threw it out. So you can argue this isn't necessarily all about, anti-Trump sentiment or corruption in the legal system. And these are things I think we need to be objective about. And for me, from day one, the Trump strategy has not worked improving things. They've just been throwing, as I said, mud at the wall, wanting something to stick, instead of targeting things and going, well, is Antrim really a good place for us to target? The vote was turned around. It's kind of like asking to prove something. Well, they turned it around. So therefore, let's pick on something where something wasn't turned around, and pick on certain things, and then say, okay, if we've got the evidence, demand a hand count across the entire state. Now, okay, they did do some things in certain states, of course, that's true, but that actually didn't work in Trump's favor either. So again, there is a strategy here for me that's failing, and this has undermined their efforts to prove, this endemic voter fraud that is obviously the Trump team and is been saying for the last 6 weeks now. It's incredible. It's 6 weeks, but yeah, that's what. And I think that's extremely unhelpful in getting to the bottom of this.
Yeah, there was a lot of acknowledgement, even from the conservative base that looked at the lawsuits, and the same assessment that unfortunately several weren't written that well to present to the courts, were rushed. Everything else, and again, I'm no legal expert, but this is coming from people who had read them, and assessed them. Paul, I want to get your thoughts in regards to the information that came forth, I guess, apparently yesterday. Attorney General Barr announced that he would be leaving at the end of December. The timing, everything else associated. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of incredible. I mean, Trump said there was a conversation between them, and okay, let's just assume that's the case. But obviously, the timing of Trump tweeting that Barr was leaving, and okay, subsequently the resignation letter from Barr was printed. So I don't doubt he received that. But the fact it came out, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour after the electoral college vote announcement for California, which pushed Biden through the 270 threshold. You could say that was a coincidence. I don't think it was a coincidence, and I suspect the timing was as much, well, Barr's saying I'm leaving, I'm resigning, but Trump's kind of going, almost maybe trying to convey the impression that, well, he's resigning, but really I fired him, and the timing is, well, we've lost the electoral college vote, and somehow in the eyes of people, Barr has not done the things he should have done. I mean, was this a couple of weeks ago? He said there was no evidence of electoral fraud. He came out and said that, and we said from day one that Barr was not anything people imagined him to be. I mean, everyone was going, oh well, he's going to help take the deep state down. There was talk that Barr was part of this sting operation, this incredibly elaborate plan that was supposed to be unfolding with regards to the post-election strategy to turn everything around, of which so far none of it has appeared, absolutely none of it, unsurprisingly. And therefore it's just indicative of the fact that why did Trump appoint Barr in the first place? It was very obvious it was a ridiculous move to make, and I think from Barr's perspective, he's going, I've had enough. I don't want to be associated with this anymore. I just want to get out the way, and now was a perfect opportunity. I suspect he probably sat there and went, well, Trump's going to lose the electoral college vote, therefore it's a good time to leave. And I think it's a strategic maneuver from his perspective. I mean, he's going to finish just prior to Christmas. I think it was the 23rd he's going to finish, which is just over a week. I mean, that's pretty unusual time scales for an attorney general just to walk out the door and go. But I think it's just indicative. He just doesn't want any more to do with the Trump administration. And the truth is, there's a lot of people inside the system who are, they've been embedded in the system on and off for decades or for years, and they're looking to their own political futures, and they're going, I just don't want to be associated with this anymore. Okay, people will call it an act of treachery and stabbing Trump in the back, but politics is what it is, and they'll be looking to the future and going, I think we've given this as good as we can get. I think it's got to the point, and it seems increasingly senior Republicans and people are telling Trump, just concede, walk away from this. But Trump's got, from his perspective, he's got nothing to lose, so he'll keep pushing it. But the risk is he'll just marginalize himself more and more in terms of the support the political establishment on the Republican side will give to him, because they're looking at their own futures going, I don't want to be seen to be part of this, because they think the writing's on the wall. Trump doesn't, and Trump will persist, I think, and until the 19th or 20th of January. But that doesn't mean he'll succeed. But they're looking to the future, and I think Barr's just gone, I need to get away from this.
Yeah. I think that, and again, with Barr and his resignation, the timing and everything. Paul, I want to switch gears just a little bit, because one of the things through this process that it's continuously being pushed to the front narrative is, and I think I've shared with you in previous conversations that we've had in regards to any type of foreign interference in the U.S. election, that much like the potential of interference here locally within the states, that still needs to be proven, that the information evidence needs to come out. But it seems like on top of that, the layer is consistently about China, and that China is directly involved with the funding of Dominion services, with the payment of services. And over the past weekend, there was an article supposedly that came out, and I've said in other recordings. I'm skeptical of it because of Sky News and it coming from Australia. And this is, and we know that there's currently a trade war that's occurring right now between Australia and China, and they came out with this article just detailing out that there's been a major leak exposing members and the lifts of the lid on the Communist Chinese Party. So, have you had time to review this, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, well, the issue with all this is, I mean, no one will be surprised at this. I'm extremely skeptical of anything that comes out of with regards to China and what's said by the West. And to put this in context, I said nearly 3 years ago, you're going to see an anti-Chinese propaganda drive that will make anything that's ever happened in the history of Russia pale into insignificance. And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, that's happening. And the rationale and the reason is because the US and the West now sees China in the ascendancy. They've finally woken up to something they should have woken up to a decade ago, but they didn't. And now they're realizing, so now they're having to go on an all-out assault on any aspect of things with respect to China. And it started 2018, it got worse, and now they're trying to somehow suggest that if Trump doesn't win the election, then the US is going to be consumed by China, and because of Biden. I mean, Biden once was sat there having a toast of a drink with Xi Jinping. Well, I think people have very short-term memories, because what do they think happened when Xi Jinping and his wife went to Florida? And the other irony is Trump paid more tax in China than he did in the United States. So, there's all these ideas, well, so-and-so's got links to China in business terms. Well, so's Trump. So what's the argument? I mean, we're not getting into the legitimacy of anything. We're just staying in raw terms. There's no difference. So let's try and not make a political mileage out of something that, frankly, for me is pretty ludicrous. If there's illegality in terms of business dealings with anybody, then whoever it is, it should be exposed, absolutely. But with respect to what you've said, that there was this huge leak of Communist Party members, some sort of database. I mean, it's not clear how they got hold of it. And apparently, there's all these members working all over the world in all the Western nations, and somehow they're seeking to influence. I think they said there was around 2 million members, and then all these Communist Party branches, and that somehow they're seeking to influence, nations across the world. It's interesting. They said the data was extracted from a Shanghai server by, well, they call them Chinese whistleblowers, 4.5 years ago. So they had this data for 4.5 years, and then suddenly they decide that it was leaked 4.5 years later. And why did they wait this long? But they actually did note there's no suggestion these members have committed espionage, but it's how much influence has China got within corporations, and how much influence do they have in governments, and okay, there's naturally a legitimate argument that says, well, no nation wants to have extreme influence inside any country, whether it's US influence in China or China's influence in the US, etc., etc. But the question is, to what extent is there any validity to this? To what extent do we assume it to be correct? And the argument is, I don't know. And I until there's something that's demonstrably the case, then I'm naturally skeptical. And people say, well, you're always skeptical. Well, yes, I have legitimate reasons to be skeptical, because I highlighted exactly what was going to happen nearly 3 years ago. And here we are, it's exactly happening. And I stated precisely the reasons why it would happen. And you made reference to, in a broader context, China and Australia. And I think there's a very interesting story that builds from this. And here's the question, is China was never a problem in 2010 or 2012 or 2014 or 2016. Suddenly it became this problem in 2018, and all these nations suddenly had a problem. I mean, if you look at Australia in the last 2 years, the deterioration in China-Australian relations is enormous. I mean, and here's an example why in 2015 was Darwin Port leased to China, well, a Chinese company, for 99 years. China suddenly had an enormous boost to Australia's tourism, property sectors. It was a huge import market for Australian goods. I mean, in 2019, around 50% of Australia's commodity export earnings came from China. We had Victoria State in 2018 signed an MOU to be part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. They're now trying to upend that and prevent that happening. And what Australia is not learning is the US is the cause of all this breakdown. And ultimately, it'd be very damaging to Australia's economic and political interests. And this foreign political interference story that the Americans and the British and everyone else likes to portray is very obvious. And it's, of course, the Five Eyes Alliance. So Australia needs to open its eyes wide open in terms of what its real relationship with China should be. And this endless idea, and it's the same MO, China's your enemy. They want to achieve world domination, which they don't. And then what do we see? This enormous explosion of negative Chinese sentiment inside the government, opposition parties, think tanks who are financed by who exactly? I mean, we're seeing it now rearing its head in the UK. It's the same MO. And then you see all these political moves where in 2018, suddenly the Joint Parliamentary Committee there on Foreign Affairs went, well, we want to push a bill where Australian security agencies need to start looking at foreign interference. It was aimed at China. The law was passed. Now there's another bill to exert control over state and university links to notionally foreign governments. Who's the prime target? China. And also linked to anyone who seeks economic integration with China. I mean, what did Australia do? It criticized China over Hong Kong. It alleged the human rights abuses against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. It conducts naval freedom of navigation exercises in the South China Sea. Why Australia needs to go to the South China Sea, I have no idea. They supported this South China Sea case against China in the International Court of Arbitration. When the US suits them to be in an international court, they decide to utilize it, but with the International Court or Criminal Court, they won't have anything to do with it. And that was completely bogus, that case. And what does Australia do? It keeps being beaten up on a regular basis, in inverted commas, by the US. So it bans Huawei. And then, and Australia, though, having done all this, says to China, but we still want to export all our minerals and foodstuffs to you. But we're going to, we're going to allow this escalating Sinophobia, which is happening all over the Western world. Then the coronavirus became an issue, and the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, wanted the WHO to investigate the origins of it being Wuhan and refer to it as the Chinese virus. Well, I wonder where they got that idea from. China was furious about this. Okay, there's two sides to the argument. You can argue the Australian point of view, but we're talking about Chinese-Australian relations. China was livid. Then the Australian mainstream media is becoming more and more hostile. And it got to the point where things were so bad, even Morrison and the Australian government were going, hang on a minute, this is getting out of hand. We need to be more objective about this. And the problem is, the long and short of it is, China's now gone to Australia. We just don't trust you. We can't trust you. Even though senior people, I mean, how familiar does this sound? A bit like Germany and Russia. The senior people in industry, trade, commerce, they want a diplomatic solution. They want the end to this kind of war, in inverted commas, between Beijing and Canberra. Is it a coincidence the US is trying to ensure Australia decouples from China? But now they feel Australia's back in line. They're doing as the Five Eyes Alliance wants. And those who said this is going to economically cripple Australia have been thrown into the long grass and shut up and demonized and told to go away. And then you look at Southeast Asia, who's looking at Australia and going, what the hell are you doing? You depend on China for your economy. Why are you shooting yourself in the foot? And the fallout's going to be immense. They're going to have enormous economic damage. They're going to become more isolated regionally because other Southeast Asian nations are going, well, hang on, do we want to trade with you, Australia? If you're going to do this to China, maybe you'll do it to us. So you become isolated. And they've yet to come to realize they're just another useful pawn or idiot in the US game of scorch earth policy as it terminally declines. And you may have grievances with China, fair enough. But all Australia is doing is shooting itself in the head, foot, and torso, and China's going, if this is what you want to do, fine. We don't want anything to do with you. And what's China done as a result of this? They started to, block imports of barley, wine, coal, copper, sugar. The list goes on and on and on. And it's going to, at the worst possible time, severely impact the Australian economy. And you have to look at these situations and go, are these people not paying attention? Do they not see this as exactly what the United States is doing to China within the United States? But it's just a great coincidence that the same thing's happening. And at some point, you would think that the political will inside Australia is going to realise that whose benefit is this? It's certainly not benefiting Australia. It's not going to ultimately damage China because China will go, we'll just find someone else. I mean, if you don't want to work with us, then we'll just find someone else to work with. That's your choice. But ultimately, this xenophobia is becoming ridiculous. And in fact, in some cases, it's hysterical. I mean, it would make McCarthy blush. It's that bad. And it's no surprise it was very predictable. And everyone's just joining the bandwagon and not saying to themselves, well, why was China not a problem a few years? Why weren't they complaining about all these things that they're suddenly complaining about now? Well, there's two reasons. Either it's not true, or something has shifted in the balance of world power that means suddenly they have a problem with this. And this has all the echoes of what they did with Gaddafi, all the echoes of what they did with Saddam Hussein, and the list goes on and on. Someone's not a problem, and then suddenly they manufacture this whole narrative, then they're a problem, then we have to remove them from power. And, people in Western nations, if they're not seeing the same repeated MO over and over again, I have to start saying, what are you looking at? Or are you just so blinded by this by this kind of brainwashing in the West, which we all are, to hate anybody the United States doesn't like, and we don't question the narrative or look at it. But ultimately, the rise of the Eurasian axis is baked in the cake. It's not going to not happen. This is, a fait accompli. So the West has a choice. Either it can sensibly sit there and say, what can we do? Is there anything that we can actually do constructively to be part of this? We have to accept the world's changing, but they don't want to. But in the process, in the dutiful obedience to the United States or the Five Eyes Alliance, in the case of Australia, they're just shooting themselves in the head, foot, torso. They're going to destroy their own nation in order to pacify who exactly? And, it's about time we sort of started to realize in the West that things are changing. But the problem is most people don't appreciate it's changing. And this is also ties in with this narrative that, yeah, the world's changing, but, it's like the whole Great Reset. It's all about China's trying to roll out this dystopian technocracy in the world, which, of course, it's not. I mean, whatever China does internally, China does. And again, that's been blown out of proportion and distorted beyond. Yes, they do have surveillance. Yes, they do things, but let's talk objectively. But I think the final point to make on this was a comment that Lavrov made, the Russian foreign minister, who said, the process of formation of multipolarity is irrevocable. History cannot be stopped. However, witnessing attempts to slow down this process Well, amongst other things, recently, Western colleagues, though, have realized it was impossible to restore the unipolar world craved by Americans and their allies. And that, in a matter of 2 or 3 sentences, sums it up perfectly. They're just trying to slow it down. They're trying to derail it, but it's coming whether people in the West like it or not. The West's day of domination is over, and we need to start to say, okay, on that basis, what do we need to do to build relations with other nations? Because at some point, we're going to have to learn to cooperate with the world. We're going to have to stop being brainwashed into believing that everyone who the US says is an enemy is our enemy. And I always come back to this point. People don't trust their own governments in Western nations. So why do they implicitly trust everything they say about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, or any other nation who's today's favored bogeyman? I've never understood that. I can remember being a teenager and saying to my dad at the time, I don't get this. Why does everyone lap all this up? And yet they don't like their own governments. Because that's what people are like. And I was just bamboozled at that age. And I've all these years later, I'm still sat there going, I don't understand this. Why can't people go, hang on? If they lie to us about what they do in our own country, why do we trust everything they say to us about what's going on in other countries? We need to start to be more objective. And yes, I don't doubt there's problems with relations with China, and there's things need to be addressed. But Varoufakis said it very well when he said, when he briefly was an advisor in the Greek government, and they signed an agreement, or the previous government or administration signed an agreement about Piraeus, the Greek port. And he sat down with the Chinese and went, this is unacceptable, listed all the reasons. He goes, I want you to do this, 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 and this, and change these. And they went, fine, we'll do it. He said, would you ever have been able to do that with the Americans? No. And that's the difference. We need to start approaching things with them and saying, we're not happy about X, Y, and Z, and we want things to change. And I'll say one of the points about Xinjiang. Well, for a start, anyone who thinks they know what's going on in Xinjiang, go and look at it with your own eyes. And China has invited the West to go and freely go around and examine the whole of Xinjiang and look for the evidence they claim exists. Have they had one take-up of that offer? No. Well, what does that tell us?
Yeah. Great points, Paul. Yeah, very, very well said. I think, we've been, here at the Gadfly and with the Sears Report and other, media companies been discussing and talking about the multipolar world, the shift away from dollar hegemony that's been occurring for quite some time. This didn't happen overnight. And, obviously I think what's at stake is dueling parties as they assess and how to move forward. And there's probably the old guard who wants to maintain the status quo of the dollar of U.S. dominance and a shift to become potentially more isolated from the rest of the world. And I think that those battles, at least here in the United States, are being played out in real time. And my concern is this. My concern is the fact that potentially what's being built up, either they're leveraging or they're using this information in regards to China for a couple of different purposes. One is potentially to leverage the executive order that was signed last year in regards to foreign intervention with the election, or potentially leveraging the information that's coming out in regards to China for some type of escalation of events. And by no means should anyone be requesting or asking of that. And I go back to several months ago, Paul, where we had the discussion where, Vladimir Putin literally necessarily didn't demand it, but was just asking for a pause of everything the events that we've led up to, and said, hey, let's bring the powers together. Let's bring Trump. Let's bring Xi Jinping, Putin. I forget Modi. Is it Modi from India?
Yeah.
Let's bring the nuclear powers together. Let's have a sit-down conversation and let's figure this out for the sake of all humanity. And nothing happened, Paul. Nothing transpired. And look where we are today. Look at the events unfolding. gosh, we have to turn this around, not just for the UK, for China, for the United States, for all of humanity, to prevent of an escalation. I don't think that anyone wants any type of outbreak of potential war. So we have to make sure that we get the message out and people understand that no one wins at the end of the day, come any type of escalation, Paul.
Absolutely. Well, if we follow the logical conclusion of World War III, it's mutual destruction for everyone. So, what's the point? But, but on a slight tangential point, but you're absolutely right. Putin came out and offered the olive branch. But the problem is there's elements in the United States who just never want this. Their attitude is it's our way or the highway. You're either 100% with us, you're against us. We're always going to want to assume our dominance. We'll break laws when it suits us. We will ignore laws. We'll sanction nations for nothing other than our own gain. They've not actually done anything right. The list goes on and on. These people are never going to change, and until the point that the US hegemony or once the US dollar completely collapses, then they can't sanction anyone. They can't do anything. Therefore, their power's gone. We know militarily they're light years behind Russia. So therefore, that blunts that capability. But in a broader context, it's like, we've discussed this before. It's like there's people who go, well, we just need to have a civil war now to resolve the internal problems of the United States. For me, a civil war now would be the most disastrous thing for all American people. And I'm divorced myself from politics, from everything. Just look at what the consequences will be. If that happens, the United States will be torn into pieces and it will never be healed. It will never be fixed. That will cause enormous long-term problems for people if that happens. And the other thing is, the United States is a major nuclear power. If it suddenly descends into civil war or some kind of civil war, what are the consequences for that? We need to start thinking about our partisan political reasons for things and start going, what is beneficial to the American people as a whole? What needs to change? And the political system has failed. We know it's failed. And even if Trump somehow turns this around and has 4 more years, and there's no guarantee that Trump would do anything in the next 4 years. But even assuming he did, if you don't fundamentally change the political system and everything else around it, when Trump's gone, the status quo returns. So you're going to have 4 years of some change to some degree, and then go back to the problem. This transcends politics. It's got nothing to do with partisan politics, and everyone needs to walk away from it. They need to and I keep saying this repeatedly, mend bridges with each other and realize that we're all Americans. We all need to do the right thing that will benefit the country in the future. We need to walk away from all this ludicrous kind of zero-sum game mentality, and we need to walk away from the political system that's dividing and conquering us. And ultimately, the truth of the matter is, whether Trump's president or Biden, the US economy is going to collapse. You're going to have hyperinflation. The dollar's going to collapse. There's going to be this period of great change, unrest, uncertainty. The last thing you need is an American nation divided on the grounds of ludicrous party politics, because if it arguably took you a decade to fix the problems, if you have that, it could take 20, 30 years. So ultimately, what are we doing this for? Even if, for some people, it doesn't benefit them materially in their lifetime, this is to build a future Western world that is fit for the next century and beyond, so it benefits people's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. That was where we should be looking at, and not trying to go, well, if we win this today, then, this means it's like the idea, well, if Trump wins, he'll end the deep state, because the deep state's the Democrats. No, the deep state is not the Democrats. It's Republicans. It's everything and everyone. And that won't solve anything. And to have the expectation, if Trump does get a second term, that somehow he's magically going to resolve all these things, well, why didn't he do anything in his first term? And the arguments as to why he didn't are spurious. And you know, maybe a final positive thing to say is if Trump eventually has no option but to concede, maybe the one of the well, two good things he could do is pardon Assange and pardon Snowden, because he has the ability to do that. He should do that, and that could be a massive parting shot to many things within it.
Paul, I think I just lost your audio for a minute. Yeah, he apologized for that. Paul may have had a call or something, or some type of notification that took over his audio. So unfortunately, we will. Paul, can you hear me? Okay. So unfortunately, we will have to end the live stream there. I'm going to ping him just real quick on other means of connecting with him. For just a moment, bear with me for just a moment. Okay, and if not, we'll close this up. But obviously, yes, it's very telling when you look at the economic climate that's occurring when we are experiencing massive unemployment. We're witnessing the buying power of the dollar. Yet, the government just wants to continue to spend. So unfortunately, it's not a good combination for any type of potential recovery. So we'll have to, continue to monitor to take a look at this, and it's not isolated to the United States only. It's appearing and impacting global markets as well. So we will be here again at the Gadfly. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Again, if you have not done so yet, you go to the gadfly.vhx.tv to find out, to learn about a free 30-day trial. And if you're happy with the content, with our numerous contributors, Jim Willie, London Paul, Ken Shortgun Jr. Occasionally, I do live streams or shows as well. You can continue that at either $10 a month or save a little bit of money and do $100 a year for the program. So I want to thank you for tuning in. Also, again, please, you can follow our work over on Twitter, which is at the Gadfly MCN. And make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Here comes Paul back again.
Yeah. Sorry,
no worries, Paul.
My internet just glitched. I don't know what point I got cut off. So
you got cut off right. We were talking about the economic trial. No, I'm sorry. No, we didn't cut off there. That's what I was talking about when you were gone. You were talking about the scenarios for Trump. Something if Biden gets elected, scenarios.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I said that will be a positive is if it looks like my internet's come back on there. Yeah, I just reverted to just using my own personal data. But anyway, getting back to the point. Well, there's probably three things Trump could do if he ends up having to go. I'm going to have to concede the election, or even if, I don't think he's ever really got it in to admit that he'll have to concede, but he stops being president effectively. He can pardon Assange, he can pardon Snowden, and he can release the JFK files. Do those three things, because if he does that, that will resonate extremely powerfully in myriads of ways. And that's three really positive things he could do. Do I think he'll do it? It's unlikely, but I wish he would do it, because that would set off an enormous chain of thought process in people's minds, of questioning the integrity of many things that underpins the US legal system, intelligence, and of course something as powerful as JFK could have an enormous impact in a positive way. So I think that's something I would like to see him do.
Yeah, I completely agree. We got a little bit excited with the little false information that came out yesterday regarding a pardon of Julian Assange, and we continue to keep him in our thoughts and prayers, Paul, just with the situation that he's going through. But there are certain things that can take place, and darn it, if it could have happened several years ago, and as opposed to in the 11th hour, we might be in a completely different situation that we're in. But that's neither here nor there at this particular moment in time. So, Paul, I want to thank you for a great discussion today. And let's do this again real soon.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone listening. And look, I know sometimes people get a bit upset with how I say things, but look, at the end of the day, it's not my job to take sides in anything. It's my job to try and look objectively. But at the end of the day, be it the United Kingdom, but let's just focus on the US. I want the US to be a great nation amongst equals. I want it to be a nation that works for all Americans. And the way the system is currently, it's just not going to happen. And I'll say one thing: if Biden becomes president, you want to see how you think we're being harsh with Trump. Well, I can guarantee we're going to be infinitely harder on him. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're here to criticize whoever's in office. We're not here to take sides. I mean, there was a lot of expectation with Trump, and okay, the expectation didn't fulfill for whatever reason. But we're not here just to be a cheerleader for Trump. And people say, okay, well, you don't criticize China. Well, on my own podcast, I have been critical of China, and I'll criticize China where it's justified. But at the end of the day, and in the future, we'll become more critical because China will have more of an influence and role on the world stage. But the US, for me, unfortunately, is or was and is a declining dominant power. So unfortunately, they have to be the subject of our discussions and our scrutiny. And yes, we are harsh against the United States, but the other thing is we don't want to be harsh anymore. We want the US to do the right things, which ultimately will benefit everyone now and in the future. And we need to start thinking about the long-term future and what benefits children, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. So 100 years from now, when all of us on this earth pretty much now won't be here anymore, people will look back and go, that was the turning point that made the world a much better place. And that's something we need to aspire to. Well, from my perspective, anyway.
Yep. Very well said, Paul. All right, everyone, enjoy your day, and you as well, Paul, and we'll do this again real soon.
Yes, and likewise.